Scenario planning is a brainstorming technique that can help organizations better prepare for the future. In general, though, most organizations are not good at making long-term plans. This is because all people, even professional forecasters and planners, tend to be provincial when looking into the future. We all cling to those things that make sense from our current vantage point and dismiss those that do not. In order to be better at planning, we need to free our minds from our own self-limiting preconceptions. These preconceptions can make us think that the world of tomorrow and beyond will be the same as it exists today. We tend to forget how yesterday looked or how we arrived at the conditions of today. Looking back, it sometimes seems that the path to the present was obvious and almost preordained. It never seemed so at the time, of course. In fact, the path to the future is a series of crossroads and intersections that only become clear once the future has become the past. Because we are tethered to our preconceived view of the world, we are often surprised by how events actually unfurl. By freeing our minds, we can overcome the common trap of looking into the future through today's lenses and escape the fate that many others have met through history. Take, for example, the great horse mineral crisis of the 1890s. In 1898, urban planners in New York City were convinced that they were about to face a terrible urban transportation disaster, excessive horse manure. At the time, the horse population in New York City and Brooklyn alone exceeded 150,000, and it was on the rise. With each horse producing between 15 and 30 pounds of manure each day, this resulted in more than 2 million pounds of manure on the city streets every day. It was estimated that manure would reach the third-floor buildings in Manhattan by 1930. The crisis was such that the first International Urban Planning Conference held in New York City was canceled after just 3 of its planned 10 days. The reason? They could not foresee a solution to the horse manure problem. As we all know now, their predictions did not come true, and the horse manure crisis never happened. Interestingly, by 1890, a long-term solution was readily evident. The automobile had already moved from the lab to full-scale production. By the turn of the century, over 4,000 cars were sold in the U.S., and by 1912, the first year New York City registered more cars than horses, the number was 356,000. City planners of the time couldn't stop thinking about horses. Nobody seemed to come across the question, what if horses are on their way out? While it is quaint to think of the horse manure crisis as just an isolated story in the distant past, rapid, unforeseen changes occur right under our noses all the time, and usually we are oblivious to them until it is too late. An example closer to the present is the quartz crisis that occurred in the 1970s. The Swiss watchmaking industry dominated the world market for mechanical watches after World War II. It peaked in the late 1960s when they captured approximately 50% of the total worldwide market. Then, within a little more than a decade, they accounted for less than 10%. The cause of this loss was the introduction of a quartz technology that displaced the need for traditional mechanics. Ironically, this innovation was pioneered by a Swiss engineer and offered to the domestic watchmaking industry, but they could not see the value. Japan and the United States, on the other hand, did not miss this opportunity. Soon they were producing the majority of the world's watches using this new technology. That is why in Japan and the United States, this is referred to as the quartz revolution rather than the quartz crisis. The Swiss industry was convinced quartz was a fad and only belatedly caught on, but not before they lost their historical advantage. In other cases, it is easy to forget where the present is coming from. We take what we have today for granted, without ever thinking how impossible it would have seemed if we tried to imagine it before it was around. Take, for example, a regular smartphone. Just 10 years ago, replicating the technology found today in a single smartphone would require half a dozen different devices, each of which could be several times larger than the actual smartphone itself. This would include, among other things, a watch, a calendar, an address book, a calculator, a music player, a photo camera, video camera, a modem, a photo album, a television, a GPS, and many more, in addition to the phone itself. Many of these technologies did not even exist in the commercial market 10 years ago. More cases can be found everywhere, and not just in technology. Who would have thought in 1970 that China was going to move from the United States' 60th largest trading partner to the second in just a few decades? Who would have thought the majority flow of container traffic in the United States would switch from domination of the East Coast ports to the West Coast ports in just 6 short years? Who would have imagined that an entire industry could appear, blossom, dominate, and disappear within just 3 decades as the home video rental industry did? Blockbuster opened their first store in 1985, and by the 1990s it was opening a new store every 17 hours. Yet by 2011, less than 20 years later, it went bankrupt. These are just a few examples. Before conducting any planning event, it is important to recognize our provincial limitations in time. Try to free your mind from these shortcomings and think creatively about the future by suspending both your current beliefs and disbeliefs. Open yourself up to potential futures that you don't think will occur. In this way, you will better prepare yourself for whatever future actually happens.